Welcome to the second in our series of events with Juan Alvez from UVM Extension. This agroforestry series has been put on by the White River Natural Resource Conservation District, the Franklin County Conservation District, and the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition. My name is Jennifer Byrne. I'm the district manager of the White River Conservation District. And of course, we're doing this all in partnership with UVM Extension and Juan Alvez. I will briefly introduce Juan, but before I do that, just a reminder for any farmers who are here or listening to the recording, this workshop, this talk today is eligible for one water quality credit for compliance with the RAP. So reach out to either Lauren or I if you have any questions about getting credit for being here today. So Juan Alvez, our presenter, has been an extension research associate with the University of Vermont since 2012, specializing in soil health management, grazing management, agroforestry, and ecosystem services and payments. He hails from a two-generation pasture-based family farm in Uruguay. He has a BS in agronomy, an MS in plant and soil sciences, and a PhD in natural resources. We're really excited to hear today from Juan about a proposal for implementing agroforestry across Vermont. So Juan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen so I can start my presentation. Let's see. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Except that. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm glad to be here with you. I think this is the second time I present this proposal. The first time was in 2016. I work at the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, which is part of UVM Extension, and I have been agroforestry has been within my expertise since 30 years ago. I did my bachelor's degree in Brazil, and I specialized in agro-silvopastoral system, which is a combination of what agroforestry is, combining crops, pastures, and animals in the same space and at the same time. So a few years ago, when there wasn't much support, I mean, there was support, but there wasn't funding support to advance agroforestry. I sort of put together this proposal that I hope I can have adepts and also partners in this so that we can make it happen in Vermont or maybe in New England. So today I'm going to talk about what agroforestry is, and then I'm going to jump quickly into advancing agroforestry in Vermont, which hopefully with the support from federal funding and federal partners and also state partners, we can make it happen. So just quickly, a brief definition of what agroforestry is. I'm going to take one of the definitions, which is the most not accepted ones, but the most known one, is the intentional integration of trees, shrubs, crops, and animal farming systems to create environmental, social, and economical benefits. Okay. Of course, if we dig deeper a little bit deeper in the foundation, I am a person that works within concepts and practices, concepts, principles, and practices. And so agroforestry is one of the disciplines under agroecology. It's one of the practices, and is based on several concepts and principles that regulates this discipline. Basically, let me take this out of the way here. But then, what are agroforestry systems? Basically, agroforestry systems are composed by three major components arranged in space, in time. One of the components are the trees. which you can arrange them in different arrangements. You can have windbreaks, contours arranged in alley croppings with different widths of alleys, so that you can incorporate crops, which is the second major component. And these crops can be annual, biennial, or perennial, or even pasture or hay. And the third component are the animals. And these animals must be in rotation. And at the beginning, we must protect the trees from the animals. So this is a typical alley cropping system, silvopasture system, where according to the orientation, pastures receive a half of a shade during the morning and the other half during the afternoon. If you orient this roughly in a north-south orientation. So animals are able to enjoy and take advantage of the shade by having a pasture that is partially shaded and having the luxury of using the whole pasture within that alley. And while trees are protected when they are young, when trees already have certain size, you don't need to protect the trees, but you need to protect the pastures from overgrazing. So you need to fence in these alleyways so that animals can be grazing within these alleyways. Trees provide many benefits to the landscape. Basically, trees can not only lower the evaporation of the system, and that contributes to keeping moisture in the system, keeping moisture on the ground. But if you, on top of that, you practice management-intensive grazing, adaptive multi-paddock, holistic grazing, or many other names for the same practice, you are also protecting the soil and slowing soil respiration, which will slow organic matter oxidation, which is something we want to protect, organic matter, so that we can keep increasing organic matter in the system, right? So trees provide that protection, and also they enable animals to be to have the comfort of lower temperatures within the system, because shade provides not only shade but also provides refuge in case there are like winds, or in the wintertime there are some weather trouble. So animals are able to gain, according to the literature, they are able to gain anywhere from 10 to 15, sometimes 20% is cited as what animals can gain from having trees around for shade. So this is a plus. But you can also organize and rotate spatially trees with crops, annual crops, right? And you can have rotations, multi-year rotations within each alley, where ideally you will have rotations of about 6 years of grazing or 7 years of grazing for 1 year of crop, especially if it's an annual crop. So you would want to rest that field where you put your crop, your annual crop, for at least 6 years before you put another crop, so that you leave space and time and conditions for recovering that area, right? So you do animal crop rotation within the alleys. There are many, there are basically 5 in the US. There are basically 5 forms, five ways of doing agroforestry, and forest farming is another way of doing forestry. And Vermont, as a state that is blessed with 78% or 75% of the state with covered with forests, it's a great place for forest farming, because there are crops that can be used in forest farming, and thus, well, generate not only benefits to the forest, but also benefits to the farmers that have forest lots. So is also, I mentioned that it was a system that has three major components arranged in space and time. So you saw me describe about spatial arrangements, and now I'm going to talk about temporal arrangements. With that, I say that you should plant trees first. And first of all, when you have an agroforestry system means, among other things, that you must manage the three or more components of the system. So that means that you have to manage trees, you have to manage the crops, and you have to manage the animals. And each of these three components adds complexity to the system. And it also adds possibilities in the short, medium, and long range. And you want to benefit from that. Benefit not only your economic system, but also the environmental system. But it can also be a way to benefit socially, because you can incorporate labor into your system to take care of the different activities that are pertain to these three major components, right? So sometimes you have to do pruning, sometimes you have to do harvesting, sometimes you have to move animals. So these three main examples require people, require thinking, and require management and preparation. So it's a system that it heavily needs labor, and it needs planning to happen. So in terms of how you implement the system, of course you have to know what kind of soils you have, what kind of topography you have, how you're going to incorporate these trees, at what pace. Is it going to be all at once, or you're going to go incrementally? But then you should always think, what are the trees that you're going to plant based on the market you have, or the markets you have, and also based on the how fast they grow, basically. So you plant the trees, and trees go first in the system, right? But that doesn't hinder the utilization of this land, because you can put the trees, but you can keep utilizing the land as long as you protect the trees from machinery, or from animals, or from ants, or from whichever nuisance that can hinder the tree growth, right? So then you can plant growing crops between the alleys, and then you start with animal rotation, or you can start animal rotation at the same time as you plant crops. And by crops, I can say annual crops, perennial crops, pasture, or hay, right? Because pasture is a crop and hay is a crop as well. So we should manage these practices. So I have the same type of pictures that I showed before. And here I gather the 5 practices that are accepted by USDA. The first one is alley cropping, the picture, the first picture on the left, upper left, I'm sorry. The second one, on the right, upper right, is windbreaks, which is very similar to alley croppings. The third picture is riparian buffers, so protecting water quality from sedimentation, from nutrients, by putting filters, by protecting stream banks from eroding. We need to protect the soil. The fourth one is one form of silvopasture, where you have a densely planted, not so densely, there's some sunlight that can penetrate in between the trees and the tree canopy, and some forages can grow. And then the fourth one is forest farming. There are other ways to arrange these systems, and basically the combinations are to the infinite. So you can arrange trees with crops, with animals, but then you can intercrop different crops within the alleys, or within the tree lines. you can intersperse species that can benefit from the shade and that need shade, that are limited by sunlight at the beginning of the growth. And then the species can be used for timber later. You can intersperse fruit trees. So the limit is our imagination in terms of what we can do with agroforestry. And of course, we need to, the boundaries are the biological limits we have in the system. You know, for instance, in Vermont, we have a short growth season. And then we need to design a system that is that can accommodate for that limit, right? That boundary that is imposed by the latitude we live in. We have good amount of rain. We don't have we have the summer slump, but it doesn't hinder the growth of trees. And in the design, we can basically the sky is the limit. You know, we just need to choose a design that will incorporate, you know, the objectives and the goals that we're pursuing. And of course, I'm showing you pictures of the Southern Hemisphere because I also work in Latin America, and I see way more diversity there than here. Here I see a few species incorporated into the landscape. In Latin America, like in Costa Rica, in Panama or Brazil, or even Uruguay, or in Argentina, I see combinations of different crops with trees and with animals that are really complex and done by farmers. This is no joke. Farmers are really, when you don't have subsidies from the government, and when you have to survive and you have a small lot, you need to put your gray matter to work so that you can make money out of that little space. So this is when need meets intelligence, and then is when you see the most beautiful combinations of trees, crops, animals, or sometimes smaller animals, small livestock animals, even bees, which are livestock too, of course. And of course, there's, I believe, according to my experience, I think agroforestry systems are more advanced outside the US because they have been happening for a longer time, and because of these characteristics I just mentioned. And so there are ways to find apps that can help you manage all these complexity across the land and also across the times, right? So I've seen beautiful arrangements where crops, trees, fruits are combined spatially and temporally. You just need to, you know, design the system and then manage it in a way that it's able to bear fruits over time, every year, several times of the year, in several markets. So you put your eggs, you put your eggs in different baskets, you minimize your risks, and you're able to really mimic nature. You know, this is a form of mimicry where, and so in this picture, I have a picture of silvopasture, where the first one is from Cornell, from Brad Chetzoe. He's an extension person at Cornell, and he also has a farm in Argentina where he practices silvopasture with pine trees. But the first picture to the left, upper left, is in New York. And this type of silvopasture is more like almost like savanna silvopasture. The picture on the right, pigs and nuts, is a system that is practiced heavily for thousands of years, maybe 1,000 years in Spain, where trees clean up whatever is left from the tree nuts of the dehesa, Dehesa. Dehesa is their form of, you know, agroforestry systems. And the trees that just come quickly cleaning up the land from these tree nuts, basically. And in the process, they produce a product that has been explored commercially and from a marketing point of view brilliantly, because today you buy a leg of pork from Spain and you pay a really steep price because of that story that they have been doing this for a long time, and is a sustainable practice that has been happening in the Dehesa. Of course, there are many other agroforestry systems in Europe. You know, for instance, in Portugal, they use that with cork trees, where they combine grazing animals under cork trees. I'm sorry. Okay. So riparian buffers, I already spoke about it. They provide many services like filtering nutrients, securing river streams and banks. They provide windbreaks, provide protection from major winds. And why is this important? Is because every time that the wind goes above 30 miles an hour, plants stop growing. So providing tree protection to your crops, it's a must when you're growing crops that need to be harvested for the market. So forest farming, I don't know if you're able to see, because what I see in my screen is a bunch of buttons from Zoom. But forest farming is farming within the forest, farming anywhere from mushrooms to roots to other crops that grow in the understory of the trees. Of course, you can also do polycropping or intercropping and spatial and temporary rotations. In Brazil, there's a system called syntropic agriculture, where nothing else than what I explained, but it requires heavy knowledge to see which plants can marry with which plants. So they are able to produce about 60 tons of edible food per hectare per year, which is incredible, because you can superpower food systems with the knowledge coming from not only academia, but farmers and also indigenous people about what goes with what. And then the Three Sisters system here in North America, where you combine squashes, beans, and corn, is one example of that, of an indigenous system. But in South America and in Latin America, they have the Seven Sisters, where they combine other types of crops in the same place at the same time, and they're able to thrive with that, and they're able to be sustainable and resilient with that. So many things to learn, right? So with that introduction, I think it's important to bring that. I thought, a few years ago, that it was important to bring some sort of, incentive to Vermont, and some sort of, design incentive or design way to bring this to Vermont in a way that can benefit farmers and society ultimately, and, make the food systems around us, the local food systems, more resilient and sustainable over time, and create a better economic, environmental and social condition for this to happen. So the proposal, and I invite you all to reflect about this proposal, is it requires many actors. It requires farmers, it requires institutions willing to work with farmers, and it requires public and private actors, and it requires a system that can group these actors into a proposal, right? So I'm going to start with institutions. Institutions like educational institutions, but not only educational institutions. They provide food, to their associates, like the University of Vermont, for instance. It provides food for its students and people that work at UVM, but not only UVM. There are other institutions that can also be categorized within this sort of parameter, right? So they can sign a forward contract with farmers to establish or to start establishing a small path to agroforestry to provide institutions with certain types of food in the future. The thing is, when I did this, we didn't have the amount of funding we have today to advance agroforestry. So, but it doesn't matter, because this proposal also has other things that are not contemplated in this windfall of funding that fell into the United States from the federal government to help move this forward. So farmers need investments, and they need certainty that what they will plant and what they will do will have a market. And without that, they can't sign into a crop that they don't know if it's going to be marketable in the future. So by having the will, by having the cues from the institutions that they will need these foods, there could be a contract signed between farmers and these institutions for them to start seeking funding, or between them seeking funding, so that these farmers can start establishing small pockets of agroforestry in their farms. I'm never a believer of starting big. You have to start incremental, especially when things are not fully in place like they were a few years ago. So with this, institutions and farmers can sign an agreement that farmers will provide certain foods in the future, and institutions will buy this food. Right? This could be binding or non-binding, and I don't have the legal language to pursue these. So we need partners for that. So brokers, from institutions or not, will encourage public and private funders to provide funds for selected farmers to start agroforestry systems in their farm, remembering that they will start small, incrementally, right? They could start with 1 to 10 acres, right, and start increasing every year. Or they can say, I want to invest, 15 acres or 50 acres in this, and that's going to be my model. But and then funds may come from different public and private sources. The ecosystem services produced by farmers can be sold to public and private companies as environmental credit to comply with environmental responsibilities. So in terms of that, this would be a second market for farmers, the ecosystem service payments, which I want to say that is an imperfect solution for the scarcity of resources we face today due to the demand we have from the environment, basically. So it's an imperfect instrument, economic instrument, that will account for the withdrawal of resources we do from the different environments, okay? And why is that important? Because in Vermont, we don't see development at huge pace, but in other parts of the world, development and crave for resources is at a pace where some of the ecosystems are collapsing. And when I say ecosystem collapse, I mean the value of ecosystems to society collapses because we are affecting not only the processes that happen in these ecosystems, but the functions that happen in this ecosystem, because we are affecting the structure of these ecosystems. More clearly, when we affect soils, when we affect the atmosphere, when we affect the coral reef, there's a myriad of functions and processes that stop happening, and that's the bulk of the value we derive in ecosystem services. Without this value, we don't have benefits from the environment. So it's important to account for, even if it's an imperfect solution, market solution, is important to account for that, because otherwise there's no solution. And because our society thinks about value, it's important to put that in terms of either energy, dollar value, or any other parameter, right? Third, some farmers will forward contract with public, private funders to finance establishing 1 to 10, or this could be a different number, right? Acres of agroforestry products to fulfill the institutional demand for these products, right? So they will basically receive funds via grants, soft or low interest loans, and will use that to invest in their farms in order to start producing these long-term plants and long-term systems, which could be crops, it could be animals, it could be, broilers or laying hens, within the alleys, but also the tree. And the trees are not only producing timber, they can also produce non-timber forest products, right? And most non-timber forest products pertain to either fiber or food. So I would say we can design systems with species that can fulfill that. So volunteer farmers will agree to establish 1 to 10 acres of agroforestry systems that include marketable products, for instance, produce, fruits, nuts, eggs, etc., timber, beef, milk, on the other hand, right? And they may have different levels of financial formats to match their loans, or to repay their loans, or to maybe not, depending. We can work with sliding scale programs where farmers that produce a certain amount of dollars per year, they will have a grant, or be able to access a grant or a tax break that will enable them to enter the system, and then later on they can start paying, or have a grace period of like a grace period of certain years that will allow them to establish these systems. And here I want to make sure that you understand that we're talking about adding trees to open landscapes. We're not talking about touching the forests. The forests are considered the highest level of ecological state in an ecosystem, basically, right? We need to leave the forest growing. We don't want to encourage forest thinning. We are talking about adding trees to pasture without affecting the production of any other systems, right? So it's a hybrid approach. So 5, volunteer farmers will harvest the crops of 1 to 10 acres or more, and will start selling to institutions when they're ready, right? It could be an annual crop that happens, every year, or it could be tree crops that start bearing fruits from 6 to 10 years after they plant the tree crops, right? And then money starts flowing from institution back to farmers. 6, agroforestry farmers should also be eligible to receive payment for ecosystem services generated within their agroforestry systems, right? Because they are working on designing landscapes that mimic how nature works, and they are adding ecosystem structure back to nature. They should be entitled to receive payment for ecosystem services in the form of carbon credits, in the form of biodiversity credits, in the form of water quality credits. Right. And this is to decide, across society. We need to come up with meetings and different actors to decide about this. But agroforestry systems, according to the project Drawdown, and grazing systems are one of the top 20 practices that can really draw down carbon from the atmosphere into the ground. And we know that when we draw more carbon into the ground, we can either have carbon negativity or carbon neutrality. in most systems that I know, agroforestry systems are carbon negative because they can sequester more carbon into the soil and into their branches and trees and tree leaves and roots than they emit from the system, right? And carbon is very, very dynamic, but it can power the whole systems because when you have enough organic matter in the system can function. And believe it or not, organic matter is the main metric that I use because it can enable other cycles, like the water cycle, like the nitrogen cycle, like the mineral cycle of the soil. Those ecosystem processes that when farmers can gather them, they're able to farm more independently, without the need for using inputs or many inputs that they have to use sometimes when the systems are broken, when the soils are not functioning. So we need to encourage this through payment for ecosystem services because we need a system that has diversity of food. I want to be able to eat from 1,000 farms. I don't want to be enclosed within a few farms or on a system that is very monocultural, because that can affect our health. So we need biodiversity. We need diversity of farms. We need diversity of soils, diversity of latitudes. In sum, so this is like a web of relationships that we need to start sowing between public, private, government agencies, institutions, and farmers in order to advance this proposal to increase and improve agroforestry systems in Vermont and hopefully in New England. I'd love to extend this to New England, but in the meantime, I am looking for partners to bring this forward. What is needed? Well, we just need to start, talking about it. We already started that. Institutions, farmers, funders, we already started talking about that. We need to design a system that can fulfill all these needs and develop specific policies, which we are on the way towards that, with the latest payment for ecosystem service working group work for the last 3 years and 30 some meetings. We are starting developing policies for fulfilling some of the resource concerns that the state of Vermont has, more like pertaining to the nutrient pollution into the waterways. But this is another chapter of it. This is another page of the same process. We need to include this. And so develop specific policies that can assure long-term commitment from all these actors so that we are in a safe space to invest to the long term, right? And guarantee policies that can protect these assets, basically. You can see what it says in the top. Right, so we need to, after we do these, we need technical assistance, which this is happening now, the need for technical assistance and economic information on a few agroforestry practices. We don't know what are the best species that grow in Vermont, what are the species that have a market. So we need that information in order to develop packets of information that the farmers can use on their advantage to fulfill this need of advancing agroforestry systems. And I think this is my last slide. So I'm not sure about how am I on time, Lauren, Jennifer, and Kat, but I'm happy to answer questions about this. I'm sure you have lots of questions.
Thank you so much, Juan. Yes, there's some questions in the chat. I would encourage everyone, post your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Kat, did you want to say something or open up?
I'll just open up the questions. Thanks a lot, Juan. I have a lot of questions, but I'm gonna let other people ask first. And Henry Swayze is asking about the trees reducing water loss, and he's wondering if that's wind dehydration. Or could you explain more about trees reducing water loss?
Trees reducing water loss. So trees, as any plant, they consume water, but that water that they consume is part of the biogenic cycle. So that water circulates in the system, and sometimes it leaves the system, the watershed, and it goes to the macro watershed, or it goes to another place, but it circulates back, with the currents. So I don't know if it's in that sense that Henry is asking, but trees absorb this water from the system, and then they transpirate, they evapotranspirate this water into the atmosphere, but they also intake water from rains that we get from a different part of the country. So I assume that there's no loss, especially in Vermont, where we have one of the wettest areas in the country, where we receive most of the rain from the rest of the country into the Northeast or the New England area. And I have heard concerns about trees consuming water in arid areas when you plant eucalyptus trees or Grevillea robusta trees that grow really fast, and they consume a lot of water, and they can drain or lower the water table in the soil profile. I have heard concerns about that, and I have advised to use a mix of trees that grow faster and in a slower fashion. So, and I'm not sure this is the answer you wanted to hear, Henry, but let me know.
Yeah, Henry, feel free to unmute if you wanted anything else. I think that was a great answer, and thanks also for talking about how trees suck up a lot of water, and that might not be the thing that you're looking for. So it's important to be thinking about what species you're planting. Another question concerning ecosystem services from Earl Hatley: where does the money come from, and who purchases the ecosystem services in your proposal?
That's a larger question, and we need to establish that. And this is a system that needs to be designed by many people. It has to be democratic, and has to be doesn't need to be necessarily long. But I think we need to start talking about these. It's important to bring private actors, because we can always rely on federal, because federal is society, is us. So, I mean, and it's good to rely on federal, but we also need to mix up funds, because the private sector also uses resources to their benefit, and it should also participate, and also can use the resources. They can use the products derived from these agroforestry systems. So in terms of practical ways of getting funding from these, we can write another tab to the federal government and ask for certain earmarked money for this program, which I think is happening already and is great. But in other countries where the federal government is not so large, people have resource to charging fees, water quality fees to their water bills, basically. So you charge 25 cents per person or per bill a month for that fund, or $1 fee for that, and you start forming a fund. And then other ways to do it is to sell credits to polluters. Other ways to do it is to cap the market and say, this is the amount of carbon we're going to tolerate, and then we're going to sell credits so that we create scarcity with this cap, and then value can go up according to how much the resources are needed. So there are many ways to incorporate funds to a system like this. The thing is, society is learning, it's getting more informed, and it's learning that we are not a full planet anymore. We are 8 billion people, and resources are scarce, and we don't have an extra planet. So we need to take care of our planet, and we start at home.
Earl, I see that you have your camera on. Did you want to follow up?
Yeah, this puts me kind of on my soapbox a bit, because that's why I wanted to weigh in. Selling these credits to Wall Street and to polluters and folks that want to buy credits, which is happening already. I mean, this is nothing new. This has been going on for quite a while.
Yep.
It's happening now. I'm a part of a, I get regular emails from a list on Wall Street about the hot new credits that are available now, all the natural resources that you can buy credits from. I get that from them because I'm interested in what they're doing, because it reinforces the thing that I'm really up against, and that's the monetization of nature. You know, all the things that you're talking about are things that are really great and that we need to do in order to bring up the quality of our soils and to increase the availability of foods for our peoples and for society, and remake agriculture, the field and study of agriculture. And I applaud everything that I saw that you presented, except for now turning that into a way of selling carbon credits to the market and to the polluters so that they can use that to say all the emissions and all the pollution that we're doing now is hidden underneath all of these great credits that we're buying from everybody that's doing good stuff to increase carbon in their soil. But it doesn't change anything. It's not helping the climate problem that we're dealing with. It's just monetizing nature for them so that they can hide their pollution, and that's what's really happening. So I was with you except for the carbon credits, because they don't work. They don't change the problem that we're facing. And that's my soapbox, and I'll shut up. So
Oh, that's great, Earl.
there's a lot of people that disagree with me here.
You know, that's great, Earl. It's a problem that, and I mentioned before that this is an imperfect economic instrument that we use to address this scarcity, this problem with resources, because 100 years ago, we were only 2 billion people. And in last century, we doubled the population twice. And right off the bat, you know, we are using more resources. And if you zoom in into what the food system is today to feed 8 billion people, who are some are malnourished by it, to feed most of us, it takes a tremendous amount of sophistication in terms of logistics, in terms of resources. You know, if you take apart a sandwich and you look at what goes into that sandwich, you know, it goes the bread, it goes ham, cheese, lettuce, you know, to produce all that. And if you translate that into the footprint of each of these components of that sandwich, is mind-boggling. And we eat 3 times a day at least. We need 2,000 calories as adults. So we need to be able to come up with ways to put some conscience on people, because otherwise and I get what you say about payment for ecosystem services and monetizing nature. I am feeling the same. The lever we have is to put a cap on resources. So these are the resources we agreed to use, and nothing else beyond that. And there's going to be a time when, you know, we reach that cap, that we will be able to either increase the price of resources, but not keep, you know, invading. I'm not articulating well, but putting a cap, a market cap that is agreed upon by many actors, and this should be something global. Doesn't have to be something local or regional. It has to be something global, because investing in nature, like allowing nature to thrive, has a benefit cost of 100 to 1. So if you allow nature to thrive, and if you design systems that mimic nature and work like nature, the benefit to society is 100 to 1, according to Andrew Balmford from the Oxford University in England. He wrote a paper in 2012 that explores that, and I invite you to read about it. So putting a cap is a way to sort of, don't have to put like a limit on how much we can exploit nature, right? So we can exploit up to this cap, and then everything else needs to be traded. And the less resources, the higher the price. So something's got to give, something's got to change. And in the meantime, society will start learning about these things, like it's learning now, getting more information, and starting choosing products, voting with their pockets in order to find a way to encourage practices that are benign to society and to the environment. Like it's imperfect, I know.
Thanks, Juan. Earl, do you have something else?
I would just say doing the right thing for future generations is the right thing. Capitalizing on it in the marketplace, to me, is and
Mm-hmm.
masking all the bad behaviors by doing that, to me, is just wrong. We should be. Why do why do we have to make money out of doing the right thing, when in doing the right thing, selling our products is how we make our money? If we're doing farming correctly and we're gaining a product that we can sell, that is what we do. And we do it better. We sequester carbon. We're doing regenerative agriculture. We're learning how to do all of these things right. And we're farming is getting smaller and more people out there, and we're all getting to where we can eat local and eat better and healthier. Is that not the goal? And so what is wrong with that? Why do we are always looking on ways that we can get rich off of that? The extreme of that is, okay, well, I've got a lot of rocks on my property. If I decide, well, I don't want anybody to mine my rocks, I'll just go out and count my rocks, and what's the credits for that? I'll go sell that on Wall Street too. I can just rock on my porch and sell credits everywhere and not have to do anything. Just let it all go. It just kind of gets out of control. And so the thing is let's do what we do right and be happy and do the right thing, and to protect our Mother Earth and future generations, and that should make our hearts proud, and that's what we're here for as agriculturalists, and that should be fulfilling. But selling credits to polluters is just, not right. And I'll shut up. Thank you very much.
If I can quickly comment on that, Earl, I mean, I am with you. I agree with you. I think, as I said before, it's like an imperfect way to deal with the problem, because we have an individualistic society, and we are raised to think that we are supreme over the world. We are not equal with the other beings, and that's wrong, because that's something that is built and we can deconstruct. But in the meantime, the market recognizes value in terms of dollars or in terms of other metrics, and it's a helicopter running. Okay.
we can move on to some more questions that I think we could have a whole series on the financialization of nature and all of the ins and outs and what we're learning and what we're learning from global movements about that as well. And Juan, I know you have a lot of experience with that as well. I see Graham has his hand up, and we also have a few other questions in the chat.
Just to say one thing, the monetization is one thing and the value is a different thing. You know, the value, for instance, if you say the value of a coastal protection by a mangrove is such and such, is billions of dollars of, coastal protection, or the value of pollination to North America is such and such. Monetization is a different thing, but we need to acknowledge the value, because without that value, we cannot bear benefits like food production or like coastal protection or like atmospheric protection. But monetization is a different thing. I agree completely. Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Juan, and thanks everyone for hosting this and having this. I mean, that the way that ended just sort of distracted me, because to me it seems like as soon as you apply financial constraints to values, that is essentially monetization. So that's how I would follow that line. But I guess, my thinking is, I came in like 15 minutes late to the conversation, so I didn't see the first couple slides. But one of the potentials for moving forward that I wanted to bring up and hear people's thoughts on more was, farmer to farmer to cooperative work. There's a lot of the work there with private institutions and farmers, and always it sort of seemed like, I think as a small farmer, and I think the root of this issue, we shouldn't be confused. It's inequity, and certain populations and individuals are affected more or less disproportionately by inequity due to historical circumstances, current discrimination, et cetera, globally. And so whatever tools we're working with in this need to look at inequity as the root cause. And it's sort of sometimes a distraction, I think, to sort of break it into this false bipolarity of, well, farmers need money, and we need to look where the money is to get it to the farmers. As opposed to saying, well, who else needs land? Who else needs, what's the greater situation here? Because if we get into the situation where we're, one of the things about, a market, like as we're discussing it, is that it's not based in democracy. It's based on who has the greatest amount of resource or power in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about people being able to learn or express their own, theoretical democratic selves or agency as a human or biological being on this planet, like if it's constrained by your ability to act in a marketplace due to your wealth in a particular system, like that's a serious thing to think about in terms of the systems we're relating with. And then I'm also not sure it was mentioned, but I think, Juan, you mentioned when you were first doing this work, there wasn't as much government funding, but I think over the last few years, a lot of people on this call have been doing work. I'm not talking about myself, but a lot of other folks here, working on it with NRCS and others to open up the funding streams in Vermont, right? So we now are at a place where we can start building systems, theoretically showing where the weaknesses are in price supports for that, and hopefully growing a system to where those, reimbursement rates more represent the real cost of establishment, et cetera. And I would just hope that farmers doing this work and service providers are really looking after for the interests of people in terms of you're signing contracts of any sort or thinking about partnerships, that you're thinking about maintaining your autonomous nature as a person, as a decision maker on your farm and in your environment with those trees, with whatever practices and work you're doing within that greater vision of cooperativeness and wholeness and working on these planetary problems. So I guess those are a few of the things I was thinking. And I think, like as Pat and Earl were saying, we can certainly look to a lot of global movements to talk about the greater issues around inequity in food production and carbon offsets. I think we know that the issue is not production, it's distribution. And that's not only of wealth, but it's of food, all these things. So I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. No, thank you for your comment. I agree fully what you said, with what you said. And I think this is not it. I mean, I acknowledge that science evolves, economic incentives evolve, and creativity evolves. So we can be open to new ways of addressing this problem that is creative, that addresses equity, that addresses natural resource concerns, that addresses the future of our families and society within rural landscapes, and the future of, healthy, nutritious, nutrient-dense food across Vermont and hopefully New England. So we can come up with other solutions other than the ones that are being brought. Absolutely.
Juan, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about maybe cooperative models Graham mentioned. And I think this gets into a question too. Jenny Blair was wondering, have other countries gone this route, meaning your proposal, or is it specifically for US circumstances? Just kind of getting into what are some of the economic models that you've seen maybe that work and don't leave the farmer or land manager without autonomy over their decision-making, crops, land, etc.
Yeah. And I want to reemphasize that, this proposal I just presented today is from 2016. There wasn't any funding by then or there was interest because there were some people already interested in these and people already working with agroforestry in Vermont and elsewhere, service providers. But like since 30 years ago, when I wasn't in Vermont, I saw many different models of agroforestry incentives, and I also contributed to agroforestry incentives or agroecology incentives to change practices, to change the way farmers were dealing with their relationship with the land, especially in Brazil. But now we are going into Uruguay and doing some of the same. Or similar, but developing not only policies but helping farmers with new practices so that they can own because what I always say is that farmers can, with the right approach, they can control their farms. They cannot control the weather or the market or other adversities outside their farm gates, but if they know the practices, the concepts, and the principles, they are able to control their production, their farms within their gates, right? And within that reality, we helped farmers in Brazil, farmers from 4 co-ops, and now the system has been growing more into other co-ops and other farmers, and it's really taking off with policies that can address these inequities that Graham was mentioning, and bringing funds to youth farmers, women farmers, to farmers that are below a certain amount of acres or hectares, and helping them with either grants, low interest loans, or maybe zero interest loans with long grace periods. Farmers that fall within family agriculture, that practice agroecological practices, that use or reduce the amount of pesticides or agrochemicals in their farms, and contribute to water quality and other ecosystem services. So this happened, and this is happening in different levels. In some farms or in some communities, unfortunately, I don't want to say corruption, but sometimes politicians use perks to convince farmers to vote for them. So they give away fertilizer, they give away certain products that can convince farmers to either vote or not, because the vote is secret. But they are bombarding all the work that we've done for 15 years, with very little resources, just for the sake of altruism. If that exists, but just to help farmers basically. And we had to go back to the farms 5 years later to explain to them, what you did, affected your farm this and this and this way. And then now you have to start over. So you need to remember what we said before, what you learned from the process, in order to be independent again and benefit from the policies that are making you more independent. And those policies, were crafted with, sweat, tears, and blood, basically, because sometimes we had to go to communities and talk to the legislative of, very small communities, but one at a time. And sometimes reaching consensus is brutal because there are interests and you're working with causes. So it's really hard. But as long as we are alive, we will be working on these processes.
Interlace Commons and Maddie Kempner from NOFA are both on. Before I get to you guys, just quickly, Stephen was wondering what kind of agroforestry systems in the Northeast you have economic data on. And I think the answer is we don't have that data yet. We're working on it.
Well, some might have.
I think that Interlace Commons might have something to say about that. Also, could you just quickly, Susan Smiley wants to know, have there been tree planting designs created for pastures that are steeply sloping or already have some trees scattered across them? And I want to welcome our next questioners to answer those two, but Juan, go for it. Steep slopes.
Steep slopes. So we have to slow down the speed of the water in the landscape, otherwise we will have erosion. So we need to work on a design that can slow down the water. And there are designs that are available in professionals that are available within this meeting that can help you design these systems, and we have to trust them, and they are available for farmers.
Yeah, so Susan, I want to make sure that you're aware of Interlace Commons Agroforestry, and also there's a farm to plate agroforestry team to be a part of to continue the learning. Maddie, go ahead and ask your question.
I think more of a comment because Juan really answered the question that I was working on in the chat. And I just want to highlight what you said, Juan, about really that long fought systems change in certain places that unfortunately was undercut by political corruption. But I've just been thinking a lot about that question, like how do we create long-lasting systems change that is really built by the people that are enacting it and who will be, charged with enacting it for the future. And I think that's it, right? Like organizing in communities, being informed by the community that these policies and programs are meant to serve feels really critical to me. And I think those communities have the best, potential to come up with the systems that work for their own, cultural identities, their geography, their climate, et cetera. So that's going to be a takeaway for me from this conversation. I appreciate you mentioning it.
Yeah, short and sweet. I think the best weapon we have is information and education, not only to farmers, but to society. We need to inform, people that consume the products about, we need to be optimistic because there are more than two ways of doing it. But, in one way, you're degrading ecosystems. In the other way, you are empowering ecosystems. You are contemplating their processes, their rest, a rotation, a diversity. You're becoming more resilient. If people don't know where their food comes from and how is the food created or produced, then people is not going to care. So we need to involve society more in the process. We need to engage farmers in that process.
Thanks, Juan. Megan.
Hi, folks. For those of you who don't know me on this call, I'm the founding executive director of Interlace Commons, which is a agroforestry and research organization, and we're based here in Vermont. I will just say that my two colleagues are also on this call. Rand Hagenstein is our associate director, and Eli Roberts is a service provider with us. I just want to make people aware that agroforestry is being practiced in Vermont, and oftentimes it's just not identified. It's not identified in the ways that the USDA defines. Number two, we've been training farms in Vermont and across the Northeast since 2016. Number three, and I'm probably not supposed to say this, but it's becoming clear that people don't know, but it will be announced soon, that Interlace Commons is in a cooperative agreement with the USDA, and that all 5 agroforestry practice codes are turned on in the state of Vermont. We are one of few states in the country that has been able to turn on these practice codes. There should be no reason why Vermont farmers can't access agroforestry in the coming years. So that does not mean everybody go run to the USDA and say, I'd like agroforestry. I'll let you know when to do that. We have a long waiting list of people who are interested, and we are sorting through the details of what that program would look like. The other thing that I just want to say is that it's really hard to be, I've been working in agroforestry policy for about 10 years, and I assure you, I oftentimes feel the need to pull my hair out because systems change doesn't happen quickly. But I assure you that we have some brilliant people working at Vermont NRCS, and we are, as Graham suggested, working to address the practice standards and the payment schedules so that farms are incentivized to plant trees or trees with crops or trees with animals. The other thing that I'll say is that we have a variety of farmer presentations that are coming up this fall. We have an immense amount of agroforestry going in Vermont's landscapes across different land use types, and we are prepared to share all of this with you. We are just very, very thick into planning for and implementing some of these practices. And the other thing that I want to say is that Interlace Commons is not the only organization in this area working on agroforestry. I know that the conservation districts are certainly diving deep into it, and we're committed to working with them. I also am hoping that Kristen Giovanelli is on this call, and that Dartmouth College is, their agroecology department is doing important work with dairy participants. So if you have questions about what's happening in agroforestry in Vermont, you are welcome to email me or Rand or Eli, and we will keep you up to date. But we are busting our ass to make sure that farms can access these practices. So for the USDA who's on the call, I'm sorry I spilled the beans, but it was kind of time. So I'm sure I'll get in all sorts of trouble for that. I have to run on. Well, okay, Felix, good. Tom, I think, is here too. So, but that was great. I really enjoyed that presentation, Juan, and we'll figure out ways to collaborate with Extension. And certainly we're working with Amber Reed as a farmer and trying to educate, government entities and Extension entities. But the Extension, the education goes both ways. We really learn a lot from our farmers. So,
of course.
Well, and NOFA, we'll collaborate with you too. We've been wanting to do it for a long time, but for me, it was just me for a very long time.
Yeah.
Megan, I'm so glad to hear that Interlace Commons is increasing its capacity.
Yeah.
Y'all do such amazing work. You have been incredible, and I'm just so grateful. And you'll be interested to know, maybe all of you would be, that over 100 people signed up for this workshop and the one 2 weeks ago, just to show you the level of interest on a Monday afternoon in agroforestry is really good. So these are all really great signs. Juan, I'm going to give it your call. I think you had to leave at 1:45. We have one more question, hand up.
It's fine. I can stay a little more.
Okay, and we also had some more questions in the chat, which I've kind of lost track of. But yeah, Henry, go ahead.
Thank you. Juan, you brought up that there's so much more successful agroforestry going on in Latin America, and there were some questions about that in the chat. I'm just beginning to understand that in Latin America, while there's, in some environments, there is little to no access to foundation or government funding for these kinds of projects, there is a really different sort of identity base. People identify as communities and are able to get together in much broader collaboratives because there isn't this rugged individualism that we suffer from here in the North. So I'm sort of on this call and in this community looking for that broader grassroots education collaborative project, because I think my friend Kat Buxton once said, we've got to start working like there's not going to be money, because there's not going to be money. I think that, yeah, a grassroots education project to help people understand the necessity of this work to our economy and in response to the changing climate is, you know, we've got the folks in the room with the boots on. So hopefully that's going to be coming together in the coming months or years. Do you have anything to say about what we could do as a group to sort of pool our energies and try to advance this effort?
Yes, well, I want to say that, you know, individualism is not a product of the United States, or, you know, there's individualism in the second, in the third world. You know, it's the nature of the beast. You know, we're humans and we think we're supreme. But I welcome the words of Megan, because, you know, she's been tirelessly working for this to happen, and she's been betting on, you know, on all this practice to be turned on, and you know, she's being, you know, the real legs on the Megan in other service providers, of course, but, you know, she's been there for a long time, and you know, it's great to see that she's here, you know, listening to this presentation, this discussion as well, and engaging as well. I think, you know, even if what you said is true, Megan, I think we're just at the beginning of the process. You know, this is kind of the step one. We need to keep growing. We need to keep expanding. This is happening because of the right policies. It's not, I mean, it didn't happen before for a reason, but now we have aligned policies that are enabling this, and those policies are recommending funds to start, you know, putting trees on the ground. And this is great, but we need to organize this effort and to make this effort, make our group solid, so that we can keep influencing policy and keep making this happening for a long time, because these are the benign practices we want to promote.
Megan, is that a new hand raised?
Yeah, just to echo what Juan is saying, adoption is just a very small piece of the challenges we're faced in implementing agroforestry. As Juan suggested, we have value chain issues. We have, you know, we get confused when we talk about economics, because there's a difference between enterprise planning and economic modeling in agroforestry, because we're combining land uses. We do not have the infrastructure in place, including enough plant materials to implement these projects. We do not have places to store bare root materials. We do not have transportation. We are just skimming the surface of what is necessary to get trees on farms. And as Henry mentioned, you know, thinking about the economic model of how these practices get into landscapes, and we can't fully rely on the US government. But I will say this, that there is, and I assure you, I you know, wrote a lengthy 100-something page paper on this, that the USDA, there is nobody in the United States, including private equity, that has the capacity to fund agroforestry right now. And that some people don't like to hear that, but that's the truth. And but I do agree with Henry. You know, how do we do these community projects together and share knowledge and resources? And actually, again, I'll kind of kick it back to Kristen, but I think she works in a cohort model that you know, addresses some of that. Our model is, once the practice is implemented, we'll start to run farmer to farmer field days. But the long-winded point here is that there are lots of interconnected challenges to planting and maintaining trees in agricultural landscapes. And we are just skimming the surface, although Interlaced Commons has made some fairly significant inroads, and we are, in a week of time, going to the Midwest to bring back machinery that will help with mechanized tree planting at scale. So I actually have to run off to another meeting, but I'm really glad that I got to meet everybody here. And if you want to be in touch, I'll put my email in the bottom here in the chat. And send me an email if you want to get on our non-existent email list at the moment. But we'll get one going. And do reach out to others in this group doing this work. There's a ton of agroforestry coming to Vermont. I think we have 10, 15, almost 20 projects in Vermont this year. See y'all soon.
Fantastic.
Thank
Thanks-
you, Megan.
Thanks so much, Megan.
Yeah.
Felix.
Felix.
Felix, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
No, not a question. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Felix Jimenez, State Grazing Specialist for NRCS Vermont. I have a concern since all this NRCS practices were turned on in Vermont, started in Vermont. And my main concern is supply, stock supply. We don't have enough trees to plant with the demand of applications that we have. And I can say this by personal experience because I know people, they used to work at nursery farms, own nursery farms, and they are closing down. And that's my concern. If anybody on this meeting knows someone that has a nursery farm that can supply trees for these practices, please send them my way. We need to talk. And second of all, I asked Juan last time that we met, the previous meeting. We need to remember that agroforestry is a really long-term investment.
Mhm.
We're talking about here in Vermont, at least 10 years until we get a product, if you will, out of those trees. And we need to tell anyone that's interested in this practice the economics of this. And keep in mind, this is a long-term investment. And not only that, once we planted those trees, they need to be protected.
Mhm.
And that has a cost, and it's not an easy task. We have the practices, we can cost share a lot of these projects. We can incentivize a lot of these projects, but we need to be aware that it's a long-term investment, and this has a substantial cost just to keep those trees alive.
Yeah.
During the length of this project, so we can have a product in the next 10, 15, 20 years. It's a long haul, but we can do it. We're willing to do it. And here we are in an RCS Vermont. Any questions that you might have, please, you can contact me.
Yeah.
It's my name .usda.gov. And I'm more than willing to help on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Yeah, I wanted to reemphasize the role and the importance of USDA and the federal government in pushing this forward. It's because of the USDA and its role in leading this process that we are advancing agroforestry. Like Megan described, we are not done yet. We need to keep working on the different intricacies of the relationships and keep developing it more. But I want to say that I acknowledge that and I praise that. I think we need to acknowledge that because in other countries, they don't have such a large back, to shoulder the cost of these. And the way people do in other countries is they work with annual cover crops or annual crops that they sell, and they can finance the establishment of agroforestry. So there are potential ways we can work this out, and we just need to be creative.
Thanks so much, Juan. And I'm so sorry to say that we've got to end the call because this Zoom link has another engagement. So thank you all so much. And as I just put in the chat, Lauren and Jennifer and I, Vermont Healthy Soils, White River Conservation District, Natural Resources Conservation District, and Franklin County Conservation District will put our heads together to figure out how we can co-create more opportunities for discussion and co-learning in all things agroforestry. There are so many people on this call that would probably love to present and share more. So I think we'll probably be in touch. And if you have some capacity that you want to lend to that, send us an email because we could use your capacity.
And I would say the Vermont Farm to Plate Network hosts an agroforestry working group that Juan is a part of, that he gave this presentation to. So I think this conversation would be really well suited for that group. So I put a link in the chat and you can join the Farm to Plate Network there. Hazel, I would love to hear what you had to say. I feel really bad about not hearing from you. I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Juan, very much for all your work, your passion, your willingness to present, and working with us to make this happen this spring.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, and I think we have a lot of work to do together.
It's so exciting, you guys. Thank you so much. This is Hazel, but I'm very excited about agroforestry in Vermont. I need to learn so much more, but I think we can do it because didn't they plant all of these trees that are here now after they were bare or something in the history of Vermont, right? They chopped down everything and they brought it. So we could do it. We can continue.
I love your attitude, Hazel. I look forward to learning with you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Juan.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much,
friends.
everybody. Stay fine. Stay fine. Bye.
Bye-bye.